Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Firefighting runs in my blood. My grandfather and father were both firefighters, and our family has a unique collection to prove it. We own several restored antique fire trucks. When my grandfather bought some old trucks from the fire company where our family used to volunteer, the only problem was storage. His townhouse backyard couldn't fit them properly, and he didn't have space for a proper building. When my dad bought a few acres of undeveloped land, it seemed like the perfect solution. We'd build a barn for the trucks and a house for ourselves. The property was right next to a new neighborhood, and all we needed was to get it rezoned from farmland to residential. That's when we met the neighbor I'll call Karen. During the rezoning hearing, she showed up with a bunch of other neighbors throwing out the most ridiculous objections. Karen stood up and declared that the land should be preserved for horses to run free. I quietly asked my dad if anyone even owned horses around here, to which he replied that there weren't any within miles, and the property was too small for horses anyway. Despite their protests, we got the rezoning approved after 2 weeks of nonsense. As soon as we started clearing the land, we moved the fire trucks onto the property. My dad, being a firefighter himself, decided to burn the cleared trees in a controlled burn. He called the fire department first to get approval. That's when Karen made her first move. She came marching onto our property, phone in hand, screaming her head off. She threatened to call the fire department, claiming what we were doing was illegal. My dad tried to explain that he was with the fire department himself and pointed out that we had 2 fire trucks right there just in case. Karen wouldn't listen and kept insisting she would call them anyway. My dad just sighed and called the fire department himself. He asked if anyone had reported a fire at his property that day. When they confirmed that no fires had been reported at all, he turned to Karen and called her out for lying, telling her to go back to her house and stop bothering us. We thought things would calm down after we finished building, but Karen had other plans. She started having frequent yard sales, and her customers began using our lawn as a parking lot. Not just partially, they'd park their entire cars on our grass. We put up a clear, "No parking" sign, which worked for a while. Then one day I watched as Karen walked right up to our sign, yanked it out of the ground and threw it into the woods behind our house. The very next day, people were parking on our lawn again. That's when things got interesting. We had just gotten temporary custody of a massive Ford Louisville fire truck from another department, basically a semi-truck converted into a fire truck. Part of our agreement was to run it weekly to keep it in good condition. My dad, who'd been driving these trucks for decades, came up with a brilliant plan. He put the sign back up, then took the truck out for its weekly run. He drove to the end of the neighborhood and turned around. Now, this truck had a 10-speed manual transmission, and my dad knew exactly how to work it. When he approached Karen's house during her yard sale, he downshifted from 8th gear to 3rd. The diesel engine responded exactly as expected, belching out thick black smoke right towards her yard sale. The smoke wasn't thick enough to damage anything, but the smell of diesel was overwhelming. Within days, everything from her yard sale was in garbage bags by her trash can. She never filed a police report. After all, how would that conversation go? "Officer, my neighbor's antique fire truck drove by and made my yard sale smell like diesel." She never had another yard sale again. I guess the prospect of having her items smell like diesel fuel was enough to end her yard sale business permanently. Considering she'd been nothing but terrible to us since day one, watching her lose out on hundreds or thousands in potential yard sale profits felt like perfect karma. Just the other day, I saw her giving our property a wide berth as she walked by. Guess she finally learned that messing with firefighters and their trucks isn't such a bright idea after all. I was born into what looked like a normal family from the outside, but behind closed doors, it was anything but normal. My father worked 2 full-time jobs to keep us afloat, which meant he was rarely home. My mother, on the other hand, was always there, but she might as well have been absent too. From the time I could barely reach the kitchen counter, I became the household's unofficial maid and cook. At just 4 years old, I was already learning how to operate the washing machine and microwave. My mother spent her days sprawled on the couch watching TV shows and ordering me around like her personal servant. When my father would come home and find the house in disarray, he'd confront my mother about her laziness. But as soon as he left for work, she'd turn on me like a rabid animal. She would scream at me, calling me a worthless little brat, and blaming me for my father giving her grief about the house not being clean enough. When I tried to defend myself by saying I did my best, she slapped me and ordered me to stop talking back and get back to work. The constant stress and exhaustion took a massive toll on my health. I was getting sick every other month. Strep throat, bronchitis, severe colds, you name it. Even with a fever of 102 degrees and antibiotics in my system, I still had to cook and clean. She would coldly tell me she didn't care if I was sick, demanding to know who would feed her if I didn't cook. That's when I started my silent revenge. Every time I cooked for her while sick, I'd spit in her food. Sometimes I'd accidentally drop it on the floor, the same floor she never cleaned, and serve it anyway. She'd wolf it down without a second thought, completely oblivious to why she'd always get sick right after I did. This went on for 12 long years. 12 years of abuse, manipulation, and secret revenge. After I moved out, my health miraculously improved. Instead of being sick 6 to 8 times a year, I only got sick twice in 3 years. But my mother had the audacity to blame my weak immune system on my brief stay in foster care. One day we got into a heated argument about my childhood. She called me a liar, claiming I never had to do anything around the house until middle school and insisting she did everything herself. When I brought up all the times I had to cook for her while I had strep throat, she laughed in my face and smugly told me that never happened, knowing I could improve it. That's when I dropped the bomb. I asked her if she ever wondered why she always got sick right after me, and revealed that I had been spitting in her food for 12 years. She turned ghost white as the realization hit her. My father, who had been kept in the dark about the abuse, finally learned the truth when I took my mother to court. I'll never forget watching my father break down in tears as he heard about everything she'd done to me. He had no idea. He was always working, trying to provide for us, while she was destroying me behind his back. The court showed no mercy. She was charged with neglect, failure to protect, and failure to supervise. The judge went a step further and barred her from being around children entirely. Her reputation in our community was completely destroyed. Recently, circumstances forced me to move back in with my parents temporarily. But things are different now. My father has become my fierce protector, making it crystal clear that I don't have to lift a finger, especially not for her. He watches her like a hawk, and she's finally getting a taste of what it's like to do things for herself. The woman who once ruled over me with an iron fist now can't even look me in the eye. She's lost all her friends, her family's respect, and most importantly, her power over me. Every time she tries to order me around now, my father intervenes, telling her she's done enough damage and threatening that she'll be the one looking for a new place to live if she doesn't leave me alone. The best revenge wasn't the spit in her food, it was watching her entire world crumble as the truth came to light. Now she sits alone on that same couch, but this time there's no one left to torment, no one left to serve her, and no one left to blame but herself. I work as a software developer in the city, and after a year of working remotely, my company decided to bring everyone back to the office 3 days a week. Since parking in the city is ridiculously expensive and traffic is a nightmare, I opted to take the train. It's usually a peaceful 45-minute ride where I can do word searches or catch up on podcasts. This incident happened just a few weeks ago, and honestly, I'm still processing how bizarre it was. I had just settled into my usual spot, window seat, middle carriage, when a mother and her son, who looked about 7 or 8, boarded the train and sat in the seats behind me. I was working on my word search puzzle when I felt a small tap on my shoulder. The little boy complimented my mask and asked where I got it. I explained that my mother made it and sells fabric masks to help others. Then, to my surprise, he asked if he could have it. I politely declined, explaining that it had my germs on it and wouldn't be safe for him to wear during these challenging times. I thought that would be the end of it, but then I felt someone forcefully grab my shoulder. It was his mother, and she did not look happy. She demanded to know why I had refused her son's request, insisting it was just a mask and that he was interested in it. I repeated my explanation about the germs and saliva on the mask, emphasizing the health risks during these challenging times. The mother turned away with an exaggerated pout, glaring at me until she had to take her son to the bathroom. When the train stopped at the next station, a blind person with a black guide dog boarded and sat in the designated disabled seat. As soon as the train started moving again, the mother came back with her son and let out this dramatic gasp, like she'd just witnessed a murder. She loudly questioned who had allowed what she called that thing on the train. At first, I thought she was referring to the person, which was already horrible enough. But then I realized she was pointing at the guide dog. Everyone else on the train was pretending not to notice, but I couldn't just sit there. I've been raised to stand up against discrimination, whether it's directed at humans or animals. I confronted her about her rudeness, explaining that it was just a service dog that wasn't hurting anyone. The blind person was visibly distressed at this point, clutching their dog's harness tighter. The mother's response was shocking. She declared that black animals shouldn't be allowed on the train or anywhere else. I was stunned into silence. Thankfully, it was her stop and she left the train while shooting me one last angry glare. 2 weeks later, I encountered her again. As soon as she spotted me, she started causing a scene, accusing me of stalking her and demanding to know why I was following her. I ignored her and found a seat far away from her. When we approached the city, the train made its usual stop to wait for another train to cross. That's when she completely lost it. She walked up to the emergency help button and pressed it. The operator's voice crackled through the speaker, and what happened next was surreal. The mother started ranting about the train stopping, complaining that her son had an appointment in an hour. She demanded they move the train immediately and insisted on speaking to a manager. The operator's response was perfect. They calmly explained that this was a scheduled stop for track crossing and told her that pressing the emergency button without cause was an offense carrying a $500 fine. They also said that police officers would meet her at the next station to issue the citation. Her face went pale. She tried to protest, but when we pulled into the next station, 2 transit officers were waiting on the platform. They escorted her and her son off the train while she attempted to blame me, claiming I had somehow made her press the button. As the train pulled away, I caught a glimpse of her being issued the citation. The other passengers and I shared knowing looks. I haven't seen her since, and I hope I never do again, but at least she learned that emergency buttons aren't toys for entitled people to play with. I have a condition called fibromyalgia that causes chronic pain throughout my body. Most days are manageable with medication, but standing for long periods can be absolute torture. Normally I work from home, but yesterday I had an important client meeting downtown. My car's been in the shop for repairs, so I had to take the bus. I made sure to leave extra early because I knew the morning rush hour would be crazy, and I needed to secure a seat for the 40-minute ride. I managed to get on the bus and found a seat near the middle. The bus was filling up fast, and within 2 stops, people were standing in the aisle. That's when she got on. Let's just call her Karen, because that's exactly who she was. I could tell trouble was brewing the moment she stepped on. She was wearing expensive-looking clothes and carrying a fancy bag, scanning the bus like she owned it. The moment she spotted me, she made a beeline straight for my seat. She demanded my seat immediately. When I apologized and explained I needed to remain seated, she complained about walking all morning in her heels and having 20 more minutes to go. She looked me up and down, declaring that I looked young and healthy enough to stand. I tried to be understanding about her fatigue but explained that I had a medical condition that made it difficult for me to stand for long periods. She scoffed at this, saying I didn't look sick and accused me of being selfish. When I mentioned my fibromyalgia and tried to explain about the chronic pain, she cut me off mid-sentence. She declared that fibromyalgia wasn't even a real condition and accused me of making excuses. She then went on a rant about how, in her day, young people had respect for their elders. By this point, several passengers were watching the exchange. Karen was getting louder and more aggressive, leaning into my personal space. I tried one last time to explain my situation politely, stating I wouldn't give up my seat. This really set her off. She started shouting about how outrageous this was and demanded to speak to the bus driver, claiming discrimination against senior citizens. That's when other passengers started getting involved. An elderly gentleman standing nearby jumped to my defense. He told Karen to leave me alone, pointing out that he was older than her and standing just fine. He suggested she call a taxi if she couldn't handle public transportation. Karen snapped back at him, telling him to mind his own business and that this didn't concern him. A woman standing near the front joined in, pointing out that it had become everyone's business because Karen was disrupting the entire commute. She reminded Karen that I had already explained my medical condition and told her to back off. Karen, feeling cornered, pulled out her phone and threatened to record everyone, claiming she would make the video go viral and we'd all be sorry. The bus driver's voice came through the intercom asking if there was a problem and if they needed to pull over. While several passengers called back that everything was fine and Karen was being ridiculous, Karen shouted over them about how I wouldn't give up my seat to a senior citizen. The bus driver pulled over at the next stop and walked back to where we were. By this point, I was feeling anxious and embarrassed about causing a scene, even though I knew I wasn't in the wrong. The driver explained that they'd heard the whole exchange through the cameras and clarified the policy. Priority seating was at the front for elderly and disabled passengers. Those seats were currently occupied by other elderly passengers, and nobody else was required to give up their seat, especially with a medical condition. They gave Karen 3 options: wait quietly for a seat, wait for the next bus, or find different transportation. Karen started ranting about paying taxes and deserving better treatment. The driver gave her a final warning to calm down or leave the bus. In response, Karen pulled out her phone again and threatened to call both the transit authority and the police, claiming she'd have everyone's jobs. The driver then told her to exit the bus. When Karen protested that they couldn't kick her off, the driver cited company policy about removing disruptive passengers. 2 young men who had been standing nearby offered to help remove her. Karen, finally realizing she had no support from anyone, turned red with anger and embarrassment. As she stomped toward the exit, she made one final threat about how we'd all be hearing from her lawyer. As she stepped off, several passengers started clapping. The bus driver waited until she was well away from the bus before closing the doors and pulling back into traffic. A minute later, a young woman offered me a tissue, and I realized I had been crying from the stress of the confrontation. The standing woman from earlier comforted me, assuring me that everyone had witnessed what happened and would back me up if Karen tried anything. The rest of my ride was peaceful, and several passengers chatted with me, sharing their own entitled people encounters to help me feel better. Later that day, I discovered someone had posted a video of the incident online. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive, and apparently, Karen had become a local meme in our city's transit community. A week later, I saw a notice on our city's transit authority website about new training programs for dealing with disruptive passengers, along with a reminder about respecting invisible disabilities. I can't help but wonder if my caring contributed to that policy update. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.